Well, before we conclude this series, I wanted to add a little reality to it. And I thought I'd do it by using a CBT Nuggets case study. I'm not too sure that this series would even exist if CBT Nuggets some time ago didn't look at AWS and say, you know what? That's a pretty good idea. And now has moved their entire business out of the traditional data center fashion into AWS and is quite happy about it, and thought, this technology is so amazing that we need to create a series for it. So everything I'm going to tell you in this case study is not directly related to AWS, but it's reality. I mean, reality is when you move to AWS, everything that you do is not going to specifically use an AWS technology. So let's start. CBT Nugget started where everybody starts that's running a successful web company in a data center in California. And they were, moving along as time goes, and the company had grown mature, had grown quite a bit, and was reaching the point where their original infrastructure in this data center was aging. And you know that you need to cycle out servers on a specific time. There's a mean time between failures. And while they hadn't had any failures as of yet, people were starting to get that creepy, like, I don't like it kind of feeling. They were starting to see hard drive failures. And the reason why is because their existing data center had some cooling issues to where it was not keeping it cool. There was actually a complete air conditioned failure at one point. And they just kept swapping out hard drives. And I don't know if you've been there, but when you're moving a drive out of a RAID 5 and you just got that sick feeling in your stomach of like, please don't go now. Please, just please don't go now, as you're putting in that new drive to build it. That's kind of the feeling that they were getting. So they said, all right, we need a new solution because, well, actually, they hadn't even looked at AWS yet. CBT Nuggets, we looked at the infrastructure and said, what's it going to take to upgrade our existing aging infrastructure? And the cost came out to $50,000 to $60,000, which the owner of the company looked at and said, can we do something better? Not that we can't do that. Obviously, there's a cost to do business, but to drop 60 grand is just like, ugh. Can we? Is there a way that we can look at other options? So at this point, the development team said, well, we've seen some case studies for AWS. Let's dive into this. And they started doing some research and read the case studies on AWS and said, oh, seems like a good idea. So it all started with a cost analysis, which was based on 3 web servers and 3 DRM servers. Kind of copy protection, if you will, for the videos at CBT Nuggets. So they were speccing that out because originally the thought was to use the database servers either from their office in Eugene, Oregon, or from their original data centers. They have kind of they weren't planning on moving the database servers over, primarily just because that's how it always was running on those servers. And when they looked at AWS didn't have the exact operating system of their database servers. So there would have to be some OS changes and things like that. So that was the initial cost analysis. So they started doing some tests. AWS, you know how easy it is. They brought up a couple web servers in the AWS cloud and just started doing some performance tests, just hitting it, making sure that this is really real. And during this, that's where they started learning. They learned about VPC networking, creating their own little network zones and so on, their own little private addressing. They learned about ELB and doing the load balancing between their web servers. They're like, oh, that's pretty good. They learned about SSL termination, to where they could do secure straight to the border of AWS, and then AWS could handle all the SSL termination and send it in clear text and really save a lot of load on the server. So again, learning about all these cool things. So they started off in one region, and their original design was to do, actually scratch that, the original design was not multiple servers. There were 3 availability zones. Let me clear out my cloud a little bit. There we go. I've got this fancy new mouse that if I just touch it, it zooms. It seems to know my mind. Okay, so they started originally, here's one region, with 3 availability zones. And what they did was put 3 web servers, 1 in each availability zone. And that was how they did it. And they set up ELB to load balance between them. So it would shoot requests between the different availability zones. Seemed like a good design, but what they found is when a complete availability zone went down, meaning a server was lost in there and the whole zone went down, there was some latency. It wasn't long, maybe 5 minutes or so, but there was some latency before the ELB realized the whole zone was down and started switching over to the other zones. So CBT Nuggets revised the design. Originally, they said, well, let's put 2 web servers in each of the 3 availability zones, and that was a good design because if they lost a single server, they didn't get any latency while it failed over, and it would start naturally load balancing to the other zones as well. Now, it's kind of, I'm showing you how they grew into this, but let me also tell you where they are now. CBT Nuggets has now decided that instead of using a bunch of really small, kind of like micro or small instance web servers, they will do 2 availability zones. It gives them enough redundancy with larger instances for each one of those. So rather than using a small, they went to maybe a medium instance or a large instance for each one of those web servers, both from the cost analysis side, but also just for a response time side. A whole bunch of small servers may give you a lot of redundancy, but it may not give you the best performance. Now let's talk about the database. The database originally was hosted out of CBT Nuggets in Eugene, Oregon. So you've got Amazon, AWS, and here's CBT. Their office is so awesome. If you, well, I don't know if it's, I should send people there, but you should go there. Just being in there is like a peaceful state. I don't know what it's. You walk in, they're right on a river of Oregon. I mean, water's just, they're right by a university to where, I mean, it's just grassy knolls everywhere. Water is running. I mean, like they have kind of like, forgive me, I'm sure CBT Nuggets people will listen to this case study. I don't know all of the terms that they use, but they're like, I'm going to have a relaxation moment, or whatever term they use. And they just kind of go outside, take off their shoes, stand in the grass. And I think it's even mandatory. Like you got to go take put your feet in the grass moment. But nonetheless, so what they have, I mean, they've got, peaceful. Here we go. This is like flower power over here at CBT Nuggets. And they brought a T1 line. Hang on, let me bring this in front of my image so I stop getting this little. There we go. They got a T1 line connection over to AWS. And in this flower power center, we've got our database servers running. One master, one slave. It's kind of a cold standby that they could flip over. So while the web servers were starting to perform well, they're doing some initial tests here. Again, nothing has moved out of the production environment in the California data center. They're just testing. But in their initial tests, it's kind of like the web servers are now performing okay, but they're doing requests, they're doing calls over a T1 line to Flower Power Oregon, and it's just not going well. I mean, it's the T1 line, first of all, and, the database servers got their feet in the grass. So they decided, let's move these out of Oregon and put them into AWS. Smart move. Now, at this point, they got a little worried because they go, okay, we now have, our database servers sitting in the AWS cloud, and the web servers are talking to them in the clear. Now, keep in mind, CBT Nuggets is smart. They realize security groups are necessary. We don't just want the public getting in here. So this is representing a availability zone. We're not talking about a security group here. So it's secure, like the public can't get straight to the database. But all of this communication was happening in the clear, and that was kind of like, I don't know. So what CBT Nuggets did was turn on encryption between the web servers and the SSL, and the database servers. So they're using SSL now between the two, and they realized that would smack them down with a 70% performance increase, like a performance hit of 70%. Ouch! So they're like, this is painful. I don't know if we want to do this. But then they started reading the white papers on AWS, and they realized that all the communication in the AWS cloud is PCI compliant. So that right there was a paradigm shift. That's where CBT Nuggets had a paradigm shift of like, oh, this is secure. Like up till now, we've been thinking of Amazon Web Services as like this public, like, the guy next to you is trying to break into your stuff, and he's able to. There's a company hosting two racks, or maybe even on the same server, physical server that you're running on, and they're busting on the doors. And that's not the case. AWS takes care of all that. They've got all the security compliance in the world. So CBT Nuggets said, forget it. Let's turn off SSL, and wham, everything is now starting to perform a little bit better. So where are we now? Timeline. We're about 1.5 months into the conversion process. Right now we're just doing testing. We're making sure that that things are working well, and it's starting to prove itself. It's starting to feel like I think this is going to work. So at this point, CBT Nuggets decided to automate a little more. They said, we want the ability to build these web servers on the fly. So they created an automation system within their software that designated one master web server, and then they could generate instances using AWS as slaves, essentially. And as that instance was brought up, it would check in with the master and download all the web content, all the web pages, all the stuff that you see when you go to CBT Nuggets would automatically fly over to that web server and be received there. So at that point, they now have instant generation for their web server. What does that give them? Scalability. They're starting to say, okay, now we can scale web servers and increase them as needed. Maybe we have a mad rush on Jeremy's new AWS series that just got released. Let's increase our web servers to handle that mad rush. And then, okay, now it's getting low. Let's bring those web servers down because it's now all automated. But still at this point, I'm starting to get a little messy. So let me clear off my drawing slate here. At this point, they're not quite getting the performance that they were hoping for. I mean, things were running pretty well, and they had decided, I think this is going to be a solution that works for us. However, we're not getting the results that we would expect. Now, there's a whole slew of issues that ended up contributing to that, so let me break them down one by one. First off, the hard disks for these guys were actually created by using RAID 10. Meaning, with RAID 10, you get two sets of striped disks that are put together. So let's just say you got 4 disks apiece, or in Amazon Web Service language, these are 4 EBS volumes apiece, which are rated together, in a RAID 0 array, and then they are mirrored over here down to these guys. Well, CBT Nuggets got on the phone with AWS and found out, after AWS tech support had laughed at them for quite some time, that these doing RAID 10 in EBS is just not a wise idea, because it's all software based, it's all software driven on Linux servers. So doing RAID 10 just kills it. So what they said is, you know what? Drop this down to a RAID 0 array on each one of these guys. Again, the web servers are meant to be disposable servers. So worst case scenario, you lose one of those EBS volumes, you're going to lose a whole web server. But that's okay. That's why we have redundancy. So this may be a new concept to you, but that's one of the kind of sly ways to get good performance on IOPS, on read-write speed and all that, is to take a bunch of EBS volumes, here's, let's just say 5 volumes, and splice them all together with RAID 0 inside of your actual instance. Linux can do that. Microsoft can do that. You can put a bunch of them together. Now, in their testing, at one point, now this is the only time it's happened, but CBT Nuggets did lose one of those EBS volumes. And if you're using RAID 0, that means you lose the whole web server at that point. It's gone, because RAID 0 is not redundant in any way. It's built for speed. But ever since then, and they've been running on there for a huge amount of time, ever since then, they have not lost any EBS volumes whatsoever. But I mention that just to say it is possible. Now, let me talk about today. Today being September 7th, 2012. Where are we? CBT Nuggets is still using RAID 0 with multiple volumes attached, because on average they find that they're getting about 100 IOPS. That's really the performance of a hard disk nowadays, is how many IOPS are you getting. About 100 IOPS out of each one of these. Now, they're actually rating 8 of them together using RAID 0, and on average getting 800 IOPS. Now, that's the average. But based on the network speed, they've done some database backups, and they've seen the IOPS shoot up to 20,000 IOPS. At the same time, they've had times during the day when it's gone down to 200 IOPS or so. And it's just all based on the time of day, based on what are you doing with it. But on average, I would say their average is right in that 800. Now, since this time, I would say within the last month, literally, this is how fast things are changing, Amazon has released dedicated IOPS to where you can essentially purchase the amount of IOPS that you want for a price, right? So you can say, I want guaranteed 800 IOPS, or I want guaranteed 1,000 IOPS. And at this point, again, September 7th, 2012, CBT Nuggets looked at that and said, that's great. I like it that we now can have guaranteed IOPS, but with this kind of burst, we're happy. We like our RAID 0 design, and it doesn't cost us anything more to do that versus going with the guaranteed IOPS. Now, that may or may not be what your organization would want to do, but know that that is an option. Rating EBS volumes together for no extra cost, you can get some pretty smoking performance. So they're doing that. They're starting to see performance improvements, but again, still not there. So they started looking at their site, and this is where we dive a little bit outside of AWS. They found that some of their pages just were not optimized. Some of them were caching stuff that shouldn't be cached. They found out some web pages would just send 40 kilobytes down to the client that didn't really need to be there. It's just sent there for no reason. So they're starting to optimize all this. But what they really found out was that when they had converted, and by the way, let me talk timeline. When they converted from their old data center to their new, they actually moved from Mono, which is a Linux-based kind of programming language, if you will, over to ASP.NET to manage their stuff. And during that migration, they kind of used their own homegrown session management system that just came right over when they moved over to ASP.NET. Well, once they found that, and then they found out that ASP.NET has its own built-in session management that out of the box has its own API. They flipped it over to do that, and bam, 10 times performance improvement all in one flip. So they started, initially they were looking at AWS going, okay, is the performance okay? Is it really, it's kind of laggy, but a lot of those performance issues were things that weren't anything to do with AWS at all. So now, once they find out this ASP.NET changeover, everything is blazing. They're now moving at Ferrari speed. They're going, okay, definitely, let's do this. So they started load testing. They started slamming the web servers. Everything's handling it well. They realized that the database servers needed a more powerful instance. They said, oh, well, database servers, will start them small. But the database servers started to choke. Also, the team didn't really get the ECU, Elastic Computing Unit concept. They're just like, hey, I think you just bigger is better, right? Which is normally true. But they didn't know how to scale these things as of yet. So they increased the database server to an extra large instance. So now they got behind the scenes their database running on extra large and performing like a champ. So at this point, they're now testing, and the site is just blowing away their old site. It's faster on AWS than it was hosting in their own data center. They all looked at each other and said, it's time to cut over. 1 hour for a cutover. What they did was essentially disable any writes in their old data center. So, and by the way, this happened during production. Nobody knew it. So they have a mode that they can put their database in that instead of being a read-write database, it goes to a read-only mode. So that way, people can still get to the site. They're still watching their nuggets. They're getting their training and all that, but it's in a read-only mode. Now, if somebody tried to buy something, it would say, oh, sorry, error, the database is in a read-only mode. So they crossed their fingers for the one time in CBT Nuggets history. They crossed their fingers that someone would not try to buy something. So they turned it to read-only mode. They copied the database server, all the databases from their California data center over to AWS. That was 17 minutes. That it took to transfer the database over. They changed the DNS pointers, which took some time to update internet-wide anytime you change DNS over. Total update time, about 1 hour. And nobody really noticed that the thing was updated other than the fact that the website just started performing amazingly well. Now, when they did this, they went with Windows 2008 R2 instances with IIS 7.5 just because it was shiny and new. They also had a theory, and this is just kind of going through their process as they did this, to use microservers for their web servers, because they thought, and I mentioned this earlier, let's just throw a whole bunch of these tiny servers out there, because microservers, and this is kind of behind the scenes, actually get a performance boost every now and then. It's kind of like they get these little boosts of performance, but man, they are not good for a stable long-term server. Not what you want to use. So what would happen? They actually started seeing when they were using ELB to load balance between all of these different microservers. ELB does a URL check. Remember that on ELB we can say, I want you to download this URL every 60 seconds or 5 minutes or whatever, and make sure that the web server is performing okay. And if not, go ahead and remove it from the load balancing. Well, they were just seeing their microservers get yanked out of the cluster just like mad because they were freezing. They were just locking up. They couldn't keep up with things. So microservers turned out to be a bad idea. They moved over to that, and by the time it was said and done, everything CBT Nuggets ran on AWS. The total time that it took CBT Nuggets to move from their traditional data center over to AWS with a team of people that were focused on it was 3.5 months. Now, in talking with their developers quite a bit, 3.5 months was the time, but they said if we would not have converted our language from Mono over to ASP.NET, we could have done this in a month, maybe even sooner. Now, this is Jeremy hearing them, and I would say maybe a month, maybe 2 months. It's always, I mean, you're always able to look back in hindsight and be like, oh, dude, we could have done that in a week. It's just because now looking back, you always know what you know. You've kind of gone through all of the experiences, but always realize to take more time than necessary because a lot of this, I mean, running RAID 10 on EBS probably could have saved a couple weeks of performance testing if they would have known to go RAID 0. But you have to count for that time. I mean, even though you're like, oh, well, geez, if they would have just figured that out, they could have saved 2 weeks. Well, yeah, but you always got to figure something out. I mean, you always have to have extra time to do those kind of things. So that's the case study I wanted to show you. Just one on how CBT Nuggets moved over to AWS. I hope it has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.